Welcome everyone to our last class of Access with SQL Server Academy. This is something that we do at the beginning of our season. Our season starts in September, ends in May or June. And so these first three sessions, September, October, November, we go over the basics. At the first one, you go to the basics, and the second one, the intermediary. And now we're talking about advanced topics on Access with SQL Server. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting. I'm your host, Juan Soto, Access MVP, one of only 17 in the world, and my specialty is optimizing access with SQL Server. And what I always tell clients, and when I do these presentations, when I used to do them on live on SQL Saturdays, is I'm not an expert in SQL Server. I'm an expert on optimizing access with SQL Server. And the reason being is that a lot of people have the misunderstanding that by just upgrading the backend to SQL Server, everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's going to run super fast because, of course, now it's on SQL Server. It's like going from a bicycle to a car. And to a certain extent, that's true. But there are some severe limitations you're going to find with anything but the most simplest of apps. You'll find that some things might run slower. You'll find that mostly slower, right? I mean, you're not going to have the crashes you're going to have with an Access backend. You're not going to have corruption. But you're going to have timeouts and slowness if you're not careful. And so that's going to be the topic of today. How do we avoid those kind of things going forward? I mentioned a little bit about that before. Now, if you missed the prior class, we have a channel, and I am going to put it on here so you can, in the comments, so give me a second here. Let me add it to the comments, as soon as I can figure out comments here. Meeting information. Usually this stuff is pretty easy for me to figure out. Let me see. Now it's like, there you go, chat. All right, everyone. And so please visit our YouTube channel. Now, if you really want to help the organization, this is a not-for-profit organization. I host it. I pay for all the costs for all the different chapters worldwide. You can click on the subscribe button on YouTube. That helps us tremendously. So, and if you'd like a video on YouTube, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I appreciate that. We do get a small fee, which has been growing over the years. I think last time I checked, we got $300 for the last 12 months. That doesn't cover it at all, but it does help with the cost of organization. So please give it a thumbs up, and please say thank you. Subscribe to the channel if you can. One of the things that you're going to notice is there's a wide range of topics and languages, both English and Spanish. So that's pretty good. And usually we get pretty good video counts. Like, for example, we have one up there that's 205 views, which is Group Crosstab Forum Reports. It's interesting because usually we have like 20 people come to the meeting. Now, I love this interaction, this live interaction. I live for this stuff, right? I really love being able to talk with you guys and chat with you guys. And so, I noticed that people tend to watch these videos a lot. Let me share my screen with you guys here. And so here, like this video has 205 views, and this one's got 643 views. That's in Spanish. I noticed that the Spanish videos have a lot of views. I think it just goes to the fact that people just love the ability to see in other languages. Let me see it sort by views. So I can give you a most popular. Here we go. So we got 24,000 views, Spanish video, using SQL Store Procedures and Access. That's been 15,000 views 4 years ago. So we've been at this for quite some time now. And it's really heartening to see this kind of stuff where the videos are pretty popular. Hey, so in some interesting news, last month I mentioned that we have Project Oakland. By the way, we have one of our experts at IT Impact, which is the firm I head up, Susan Pine. She's on this meeting. She's our online moderator. So if you have any questions that you want to do online, if you're having problems hearing me or seeing me, she can help you with technical issues as well. But one of the things that we are super excited about, I mentioned this last month at the meeting, is Project Oakland, which allows you to create Power Apps with Teams. And being Microsoft Gold partners, we get this stuff for free. And so these are our teams here. And one of the things that we did was we created a bot, our first AI bot. And, with having a practice like ours, we have a budget that we need to follow for all the projects. We have projects around the world, mostly in the U.S. So here, if I want to, if I can interact with this block and say, okay, it says tracker, and then it asks me, okay, what would you like to do? Username, customer. So for example, if I put here username, and I want to see a particular developer like Susan right now, I say, okay, give me Susan's projects and how many hours she has on these projects available, the budget-wise. See if that works. And these are her hours. Now, in here, in the database, her email is spine, and her username is Susan. Her name is Susan Pine, but we get all the customer information and the projects, which is great. So it's a wonderful way to interact, and we're learning how to create these bots for us because a lot of our clients want to leverage this technology. So we are creating solutions for ourselves. Like one of the things that we created, Susan was working on this week, is it's a project Susan was working on called Client Info that allows us to store the connection information for a client. So for example, we have a new client. They'll give us VPN information. They'll give us how to log in, what's the password, right? And so we want to be able to have that in a secure location. So we store those credentials in CDS, which is the Common Data Service, when you do Project Oakland. And developer can then query the database and get those credentials to help out a customer. Because if, for example, Susan goes on vacation or she's sick and she's not here, somebody needs to step in. Maybe it's a weekend, they call me, and it was my turn to hold the to answer calls over the weekend. That's the inside joke. It's always my turn to answer the calls on weekends because I'm the president of the company. But you know, I want to be able to find out what the VPN information is so I can connect and help them out with their project. And so we're using that. So I'm looking forward to her demoing that in a future meeting. All right. So if you were here for the beginning class in September and the intermediate class in October, you know, we went through the gotchas, right, when it comes to upgrading to SQL Server. Number one gotcha before you start, solve your slowness problems and the lack of indexes in Access first, and then upgrade to SQL Server, because if you don't do that, it's just going to magnify those problems once you update the database. So that was our number one nugget from our first class. The second class, we talked about leveraging the power of SQL Server Migration Assistant, SSMA, and how you can use that to upload data to a SQL Server throughout the life of the development, right? So the first time we use SSMA, we create the tables with that tool. The client's already provisioned a database. It's an empty container, and then the SSMA reads the backend access file and uploads and creates the tables in SQL Server and then uploads the data in SQL Server. Just a wonderful tool, and it goes by the rules that we need to go by. For example, all the bit fields are set to default 0, which is a major bug between Access and SQL Server. But more importantly, you know, when the customer gives us their data file, they're still using that database. It's a mission critical database, right? They're still running their factory or they're still running their office with it. So by the time we get around to having a beta version ready for testing, we want to give them a beta version of SQL Server that has the most relevant data. So they'll just ask us to upload the file. We'll just do it automatically. They'll say, okay, please update the data so I can compare the old database versus the new database in SQL Server and know if there's any issues with that. And so we use SSMA to easily upload all that data. It's ridiculously easy how easy that is. You can right-click on the project and select upload data, and it erases all the data in the tables in the cloud or in the SQL Server, and then uploads new data automatically. And then when we're ready to roll out, that Friday comes along. We talked about rollout plans and contingency plans. Friday comes along, and we set up Friday to roll out the product, because again, it's mission critical, so we don't want to stop them midweek and then realize, oh my gosh, we had a major error, so now they're down Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. No, we want to be able to upgrade on the Friday afternoon, and then if there's any issues, we can address that Saturday or Sunday, and then make a determination Monday morning if we're going to start again or postpone the rollout for the following week. So we tend to roll out things to Friday afternoon. Usually our clients can stop using it around 2 in the afternoon, and then we'll upload the data, which using SSMA. And so it's a really quick upload. So that's what we talked about today. However, we're going to talk about how to optimize. And the reason why it's important, today's class is important, is because one golden nugget you need to walk away with from today's presentation is you got to become a SQL Server developer if you really want to turbocharge the Access with SQL Server experience. I mean, there's just no way around it. I was interviewing another gentleman who's very famous in the Access community. He wanted to work for me as a consultant, and the interview was going great. I mean, he was knocking it out of the ballpark. And this is a older gentleman. This guy is a legend in the Access community. But when we got to the part of SQL Server, I said, we are experts in SQL Server. He said, yes. So I need to ask you questions. Oh, I don't do anything in SQL Server, but just upload that. Everything else I do in Access. Well, right away, you can feel my balloon get deflated because I was looking forward to helping them out. We were growing back then. We still are growing. We actually hired a new project manager recently, and I'm interviewing consultants to help us out on a per project basis. And he's like, all I do is I upload the data and I link it back to the database, and that's it. I do everything else in Access. I'm like, well, that's not going to work, because I know for a fact that, especially when the data is in the cloud, you really need to be able to leverage being a SQL Server developer to optimize that relationship between Access and SQL Server, right? That's the only way I know to do that, right? And there's 3 areas that you need to master with SQL Server, right? Let me say 3 areas. Okay, let me count them. Number 1, creating views, right? Number 2, creating store procedures. Number 3, leveraging ADODB in your code to turbocharge things, right? So creating views, creating store procedures, and leverage ADODB. Now, if you know how to do all those 3 things, you can also be an expert at the 4th thing, which is using SQL Server Management Studio. So I'm going to launch SQL Server Management Studio right here, right now. SQL Server Management Studio. Now, in the old days, it used to be you had to have a Management Studio that was compatible with the SQL Server you have. Now, they just they changed that technology, and now you can use the latest and greatest SQL Server Studio with most versions of SQL Server. All right, so I'm going to log into my desktop here, and I'm going to show you this SQL Server Management Studio. So it really is 5 things, but if you want to really leverage SQL Server migration, become a SQL Server developer, you really need to master this SQL Server Management Studio. Can you give me a quick shout out? Can you see my screen, by the way, guys?
Yep.
All right, thanks. Now, the first thing you do when you install SQL Server Management Studio is you're going to go into the Tools menu and click on Options. You're going to come here to Designers. And again, we're going to be recording this, so you don't have to take notes if you don't want to. And shout out to Crystal, who's another Access MVP. She's been doing these videos for us, doing an outstanding job. And you're going to go to Designers, and you're going to uncheck the prevent saving changes that requires table recreation. This is a major pain point. If you don't do this, you won't be able to make changes to your tables, which is something, let's face it, happens, right? So you want to make sure that you uncheck that when you install this. There's other things that we also do from a best practices point. We have templates. For example, we have a template where you can wrap transactions, right, in the store procedure or store procedure T-SQL. It says, okay, begin transactions. And I'm going to delete records from table A, and I'm going to delete records from table B. Well, if table A succeeds, but table B fails, then it goes to the failure portion of the transaction and rolls back the A and alerts to the user, hey, it failed. We didn't delete anything, right? And that's usually a good example of that. Now, I'll give you another example. You go to an ATM, right? You insert your card. You take out, you cross your fingers to make sure you have no money in your account. Back in the day when I was in college. And you put in, okay, I'm going to take $100 out. Well, what happens is the bank, there's several things going on there, ending with the dispense of cash to you, right? So there's several transactions. It debits your account at the bank. For that particular account, your checking or savings account, right? It credits the cash on hand at the bank. And then it does a dispense of the cash at ATM. If any of those 3 things does not work, it will cancel the whole thing and roll back the transaction. See what I'm saying? So it's always important that you wrap multiple transactions in a batch so you can roll it back. All right, so let's go take a look at that real quick. So here, next nugget in the SQL Server Management Studio, put Control N as in Nancy. So Control N as Nancy. If you have SQL Server Management Studio, you can follow along if you like. But Control N, excuse me, you can create a query window. Now, something that you probably don't realize is you can pretty much do anything in T-SQL language. You can create databases, you can create tables, you can create views, you can create stored procedures, you can shut down the server, you can query the server for the server version. So T-SQL is a powerful language, and the T stands for transaction SQL. Now, SQL, as you know, is an ANSI standard, international standard, and T-SQL is Microsoft version of that. So a lot of the ANSI stuff will work here. Not everything in T-SQL will work in Oracle, right? So, for example, the drop statement, drop this table, may not work in Oracle, or it might work exactly like you can in Oracle. But for the most part, all these databases, the MySQL, SQL Server, and T-SQL, follow ANSI standards. And I would say 80% of the stuff in ANSI is compatible across all three platforms. So, if you need to jump from one server pod to the next, you're not going to have much issues learning those. Just learn the individual, right? Because Oracle has also their own version of SQL. I don't know what they call it. I'm not an Oracle guy, so everybody knows what the Oracle calls their SQL. Let me know. Is it P-SQL? I think it's P-SQL. Anyway, so here I do a Control N. I can say select, and that can do a special kind of variable, the add variable. And I can do a version. Now, select, if you're an Access developer, you've never done with SQL Server, select statement is very common to you. It's where you're doing a select something from a table and doing the where clause and then order by. But here in T-SQL, you can use that for a wide range of things. In this case, I can just ask what version of SQL Server, and I get the answer. Now, notice that there's no column name. So if I return this back to Access, this is going to be a little tricky, right? Because there's no way to reference this column other than using the column index, right? So if I say as version and then execute this, now I get a column name. All right, so there's the version. So use these ats. You can use this in Access. If I'm going to show you when you pass through a query, and pretty soon here we're going to talk about ADODB, you can put this in a pass-through query and it will work. All right, so I'm going to come in here and Access. And I'm going to look for a pass-through query. Let's bear with me here a second. An existing pass-through query. Okay, let's just go to queries. And here, let's see. Oh, I execute that query. You can tell it's late in the day for me because I actually executed that query. So we got to wait for that query to get back. Don't know what it does. I may have just trashed my... This is a demo database, so it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't work. But you can go in there and type the select add version as Access. It'll come back. All right, so it gave me an error message, so I'll ignore that. I'm going to put it in the design view. I have a touch monitor, so let me... Oh, wait a second. Let's see here. Give me a second here. That's not working good. Okay, let me cancel that. Anyway, so you can put in the pass-through query. Let me just cancel this whole thing. All right, close the program and cancel this. All right, let's launch it again. And let's bring it up. With this shift key down. All right. Let me cancel that. Okay, I'm back. Move that over. I have multiple monitors. All right. Go back to object type, queries, and let's see here. Username. Let's see what this does. Okay. Select convert chart current user. All right. So this is very simple. Select current chart. Now, the nice thing about pass-through queries is you can copy the query, go back to SQL Server Management, execute it there, and it should work if it's the correct version, right? So I'm going to come in here, I'll put that there. Now, if I execute, what is it going to do with these two queries? It's going to execute both of them, right? So here, if I click on execute, I'm going to get the first one with this version, and then the next one, which is DBO. So I'm logged in as the database owner of the database, and that's where it's come back. If I want to execute just that particular query, highlight that query and press F5. I'm a keyboard warrior, so I'm going to show you both the keyboard equivalent command Control N for Nancy for new query window, and Control F5, excuse me, just F5 to execute that result. And then so if I know, and this is something I tell my students when I was teaching SQL Access, is know the answer before you ask the question. So if I come in here and I do a SQL view, which is where I am right now, if I go here and Google Data view, and it failed because I have to have the DSN here and all that. But basically, it would have come back with the results like this one here, which says user DBO. All right. So you should watch any YouTube videos to get about using SQL Server Management Studio. Now, one of the things that I really love about this whole experience of being an Access or SQL Server expert is how wonderful the tools are when working in SQL Server. I mean, this has been a revelation for me. And it's just absolutely delicious to be able to work with SQL Server. So here, for example, I got the minus key here. I can right, if I have multiple blocks of code, I can do multiple blocks and shrink them. I wish we had that in a VBA IDE. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, if you're wondering. Where if I went to into Access here, right, in my Access database, and press Control G to bring up the code window, immediate window here, I wish I had the ability to be able to shrink the procedure here, right? Not going to get it anytime soon. And there's multiple reasons for that. I'm not going to get into it. I know why Microsoft isn't invested on this, but I'm not going to get into that. But you're going to see a lot of great stuff. One of the things I wish we had, and now this database is master, so I'm going to switch this to another database I have here. I'm going to switch this to my test database. All right. And so one of the things, now that I switched to the test database, I have now here, I've got the tables. And so there's the IntelliSense is just wonderful, right? So there's a companies table, right? So here, I can say select, and then I skip the fields I want, and I just go straight to the from TBL companies. Now that I've done the from, I go back, and I can say, okay, company, and then the right company ID, and then comma, company name, company IntelliSense comes up, right? So company name should be in there somewhere. Company name, no? I wonder what it'd be under. Let's see, company. Okay, so I got company, right? Again, if I select that, by pressing the home key and then Shift F, I get my, and we. For a demo, everything is AP construction. Every company ID is AP construction for the demo. So yeah, so I get the IntelliSense. I wish I can do that here, right? So for example, I've linked the same table on the front end called company. So if I'm doing a SQL statement here, I can say select. It'd be nice if I can say select, blah 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 from TBL companies. Wouldn't you think that'd be nice if the IntelliSense came up? Well, guess what? The Access team is working on something like that, and it's called Project Monaco. And I talked about that in the first season, episode of the season. They want to bring in Project Monaco into the QBE. Now, the QBE, for those who don't know what that is, I'm going to bring up a regular query. You use this all the time. This is the QBE, query by example window. And so here you've got the tables, and I can drag other tables in here if I wanted to, and link them and all that, and I can right-click view. But this editor that you get, SQL View, is going to be replaced by Project Monaco. Now, if you go and you search the web for Office product map and then pick Access, you'll see on there, in fact, let's just do that now. You'll see on there the statement that Project Monaco. So let's see, Office product map, Office 365 product map, and Microsoft 365 product map, and filters, products, Microsoft Access. And now I see 6 in development here. And when you go here, the modern web browser control is going to be fabulous once they have that done. The graphic direct, the data directed connector is awesome. Yeah, I already talked about this in a prior session, so I'm not going to dive on it. But the SQL Molecule Editor is really going to be a game changer for us, because it's the same one used in Visual Studio Code, right? The one I was just seeing there. So it's just going to be great, and it's in development. So I'm hoping that'll be a nice present for us next year. I don't think it's going to be here for 2020, but for sure 2021. All right, so bottom line is you need to be able to save these. Now notice that this is a .sql file that has not been saved. So once I press Control S to save, it's going to ask me for a name, right? So I can say TS, okay to delete, TS, okay to delete. And now I've replaced that with the file name. I can delete. One nice thing about this is you can save your queries as text file, which you cannot do with Access, right? You save these queries as a text file, then if you open the text file with double clicking on it, you have the option to execute it right there or just add it to the text file. And so what happens usually when either myself or our developers work on projects, we're saving these text files constantly. Why? Because we might be doing a change in beta, like adding a field, adding a table, and we want to roll those changes out to production. And the way we want to do that is by taking this code, saving it to a text file, and then when we get the approval from the customer to go from beta to production, we run this code against the production database. Now, right now, it says RCBE, but in a typical example for us, we would say use RCBE beta, right? If I have one, which I don't, but I would say beta. And it's squiggly lines there because I don't have that database. Usually I'll have a beta and then beta, and then when I'm ready to roll this out to production, I remote the beta, and now the use command tells it to use it on that database, and I roll out my changes. We can literally be here all night talking about the SQL Server Management Studio, but a couple of things I want you to know is, first of all, don't get intimidated. Number two, you're going to love using it. It's a modern tool that's going to afford you it's going to give you a wonderful experience if you just take the time to learn it like I did. I guarantee you're going to fall in love like I did with this this tool. So please do that. Does anybody have questions on how to use SQL Server Management Studio? Now's your chance to speak up. If you want to know, I've always wanted to know how to do this. Just use the results down here, by the way. You see how I executed that? If I want to get rid of this one, because sometimes you have a long store procedure, right? And you want to say, okay, I want to get rid of the results. Just press Control R, and it's gone. All right. So that's a little tool tip there. All right. So it looks like nobody has a question, and I'm looking at the comments. You guys tell me, do you see any comments here at all? Anybody have a question, comment? Let me see. Susan said yes to everyone. Not sure what that was about, Susan, but thank you. All right, so let me move on. Great.
Sorry, that was when you were asking if we could see your screen.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that's going to intimidate the hell out of you is, as Access developers, when I was an Access developer, I never wrote queries with SQL. I would just go into the QBE, drag my tables, right, double click on the columns, put in my conditions. Yeah, I would look at the SQL code. When I needed to copy it to my code and execute it in my VBA, I would never develop in SQL. So one of the things that I noticed as I come to dominate the T-SQL languages, I'm not using the query by example in SQL Server. So I'm going to show you that next. Here, if you go into this database and I shrink the tables and go to my views, these are all my views. If I right click, I can click on design, and it's going to show me the QBE for this view. And this is something very similar, not exactly like Access, but it's very similar, right? You can drag tables here. You can do this. You can define the relationship between the tables by double clicking on it and changing it to left join, right join. Here, select all rows from invoices, which is even more convenient than Access. Here, you can just right click and select left join, right join. But instead of going across like Access would, you're going down. Here, notice that I have an alias here, past due. So this case acts like an if statement, and the result of that case is going to be called past due. So if I execute this with F5, I'll get back the results of this view here. No, didn't get that done. All right. So if I go right click and then select top 1,000 rows, I can see it there. And then also I can change it down here. So I have both, best of both worlds, right? I got the query by example at the top, and I got the SQL view down here. So of course I can come in here and notice that there's our past due, and I can say, okay, past due number 2, I can call it that. And notice when I click up here, in the query by grid, and I expand this column, it just changes the pass through too. So whatever you change here in the SQL code, you can do it there. There are several things you cannot do in the QBE. In fact, some of the more complex views that we have work with our clients. It doesn't work well with BE, especially when it comes with a CTE, which we'll be talking about here later on today. It's harder to represent those in this QBE. So we started with this as the ex-developers. We've moved on, and most of the time we don't do the QBE, but I can invoke the QBE when I pick a query. So for example, here I can right-click here, and I can select that query here in my T-SQL and invoke the QBE if I wanted to. Here, design query in editor. And that's my query. And then look at what happens when I click on OK. It formats it really nicely for me when I come back. See? Goes back. Same query, he just formatted for me really nicely. So take the time, learn SQL Server Management Studio. I promise you it's going to be well worth it. We can probably in December, we can devote some more time, tips and tricks with SQL Server Management Studio to help you guys out with that if you want to. All right. The second thing is we want to talk about is when you have access and you have linked tables like these for SQL Server, Access developers who are newbies with this, their first inclination is to do a DSN like this one here. See how it says DSN RCPB? The problem with DSN is if you have a 100-user environment, you have to go and create that DSN on 100 workstations. That's not a lot of fun. And there's ways to automate that using the Active Directory and policies and all that. But now you're involving IT, and they're already upset because you're in their little kingdom as an Active developer. They're going to give you more upset, but now they say, what? Now I have to do this again because as part of all this as well, you're going to need to install the latest clients, SQL Server native not native clients, SQL Server OLADB 18 and ODBC 17 are the latest versions. That's two drivers now. We talked about this in a prior session. And having to engage IT is just like cutting your veins. It's just, you have to depend on them. Who knows when they'll get around to it. And so you involve your client to force their hand doing that. But our first inclination to do is DSN. So what we always recommend is DSN list. Now I wrote a post on that, how to do a DSN list. And here's a little tidbit here. If you want to search my database, my website, you can type in here DSN list and then use a site keyword, accessexperts.com/blog, because all these are on a blog. And it'll come back with all the search. Notice that every result comes back with AccessUserGroups.org because I use the site keyword. And then here's an article on DSN list, which I will paste now in the WebEx if you want to follow on there. And it goes on to say why that case we were talking about destroying links and so forth, but basically what this is, we use a table in SQL Server to run this process of connecting the DSN list tables. All right, so here's what I want to explain myself as. When you have created a new table in SQL Server, you have to link it back to Access. Now, DSN list, the only way to do that is through code. And there's plenty of code on the web. I'm not going to go into that. You can find that. It's very easy to find. You're not going to find it on my blog. You can find DSN list code. There's DSN code and VBA. But we took that code and we took it a step further, and we created a table in ours. And I believe this is an older version one. I think this is called, let's see here. We drive the process from a SQL Server. So our startup code connects to SQL Server with the user credentials. And if you can't even read the table where the links for the tables are, we know there's a security issue and we stop, right? So when the system starts up, we ask for your password, username. This is where when the data's in the cloud and the client wants to use this anywhere. We take username and password. First thing we check to see, okay, can you see the link table, the specified link tables in the database? And if they can't, then we stop right there. And I believe this is called permissions, but I'm not sure. This is a really old version of it. Stand by.
No, it's
Yeah,
still linked tables there,
yeah.
Juan, I can see it.
So if I come in here and I select 1,000 rows, you can see the database name, the schema name, table view name, fully qualified name, the access name. Now, 9 times out of 10, the SQL Server name, which is this one, is going to be the same thing as the access name. But if you need to, for example, link the same table twice to access, and the first time it's going to be TVO companies, and the second time it's going to be TVO companies 1, you can add another record to this table, and our code will automatically link it back. So we check to see if the user can even see this table. If they can see this table, great. Then we scan to see if there's any missing links. And if there are, then we add any missing tables. Now, sometimes we force a relink for whatever reason. Maybe we want to make sure we're in beta and we just have major problems and we just want to relink every table. Our code, you can go into a table that called TVO program options and then force a relink on the code startup and it relinks everything back. My point here is when it mentions that in the blog post here about destroying the links, that's what we want to do, is because you don't want to embed the username. That's another mistake typical access developers do. They embed the username and password and their table links, major security no-no, right? So for example, if you come in here in our access database and you hover over one of these linked tables, and it pops up, you will actually see at some places the password username. I mean, come on, man, really? In this day and age, especially when you're dealing with sensitive information like social security, credit card numbers, employee addresses, customer addresses, you just don't really want to do that. So do ODSNless, make sure that your table links do not include security information, compromised security information, and you'll be fine. And there's plenty of examples of that on the web, how to do that. All right. So going back to my third point here, and that is think about the layers between the Access front end and SQL Server, right? So you got the front end file, which is the visual, right? Everything you see, we call it the eye candy. So you got that layer. And then above that sits the ODBC drivers, either ODBC 17 when you use a query def or use table links or MSLODB, you use ADODB, right? Then you've got the network interface, and then you've got SQL Server. So the network interface SQL Server, and then you got SQL Server itself, right? So you got these stacks of layers that you have to pierce through to get to the connect to the server and results back. Well, if you want to do a command, let's say for example, the customer says, I want you to build me a utility where I can increase all my prices by 10%. Well, that's an update statement, right? Update TBL products, set price equal to price times 1.10. That's a simple SQL Server statement. If you have a 100,000 row table, you don't want Access doing that. You want to either use a pass-through query or you want to use ADODB in your code. Why? Because DAO is not designed to be as optimal as it can be. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but that ODBC driver gets better over time. So when I say the statement that is slower than using ADODB, they're constantly making investments in the ODBC driver. But what the ODBC driver needs to do is send that SQL statement, update TVL products, set price equal, right? So send that SQL Server statement through those layers, pierce those layers, get it to SQL Server, and SQL Server execute that and return back any results. In that case, it just returns back how many records were affected, right? Well, in the old days, right, and we still have it, we still do it through our code, we want to avoid the ODBC driver. We want to avoid DAO. We just don't want to do that. You don't want to involve DAO on any of that stuff, especially when it comes to update statements and insert statements and delete statements, all called change queries, right? Update queries or change queries. You want to do that through either pass-through queries, which is fine. Pass-through queries are fine, or ADODB commands in your VBA. You can also use DAO and do it through your DAO, but you're back to the same problem again where you're using the DAO interface, which is not necessarily going to be the most optimal way. Now, one of the reasons why you want to use ADODB because it forces you as a developer to use T-SQL, right? Because that's all SQL Server understands. SQL Server doesn't understand Access SQL Server statement, right? If I come in here at the SQL Server Management Studio and I go into my test here, and I say, okay, yeah, you know what? Select this, right? From where, right? Where company equal double quotes test double quotes. Well, it doesn't understand double quotes in SQL Server, right? That's the other thing you need to learn is what is appropriate SQL Server content. Notice that there's squiggly lines when I try to execute this. So I give an error message, right? It's a single quote. Now, I know a single quote. Most of you may already know this. Single quote. That works, right? So now the squiggly lines are gone, and I execute this, and it's going to come back with nothing. I don't have a test company. So when you use ADable in your code, you got to use the right SQL Server syntax, T-SQL. So when you look at our code at IT Impact, you're going to see, anytime you see a query that's using ADB, it's proper SQL Server syntax. So it forces you to use the right syntax. And the same thing with pass-through query. If I put this in a pass-through query, it will work. The double quotes will not, because SQL Server throws up its hand and says, I don't know what you're trying to do here, dude. You use double quotes around the query. What is that? What are you talking about? I don't know. And now, just another great example. And Access VB is equal to SQL, excuse me, Access SQL is the wildcard character, right? And Access SQL, the wildcard character would be what? Like, when I say like, okay, like what? And I put in, I've been using SQL Server so long, I forgot what the wildcard character in SQL Server is. Anybody remember what that is in Access? Mark? Does anybody remember what it was? Ampersand. Ampersand? No, it's not ampersand. What is it? Star?
It's a star and
Star. Yes. Yeah, star. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So star, again, it won't recognize that. In SQL Server, it's a percent sign, right? Okay. So there is a good article, and I found on how to compare Access to SQL Server, and you're going to find that. Here's my next golden nugget. And I don't want to lose my place here, so I'm going to go tell you what it is. AccessExperts.com. And by the way, we're joined by Mark Edwards. He's a senior Access developer at our firm. Mark, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Start here. So I compiled a lot of...
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Thank you. I compiled a lot of these tips that you're going to hear tonight in one single page. So I'm going to send this to you here in the chat window. And one of them is, I believe, let me look at this. Oh gosh, great links. Let's see, great links to help you get started with SQL Server. Using short SQL Server tutorials must be the dynamic SQL access. There you go, access equivalent to SQL. Okay. So Jeff has compiled these. These are great, right? It tells you, okay, converting nulls, checking for nulls, string segments, finding a string within a string. Access is selecting string. T-SQL is select car index. So when I was first learning T-SQL, this website was essential for me. I was using this all along, so I'll send you this one as well, so you guys can use it. Now, trust me when I say this, that over time, this is going to be second nature for you guys. I mean, it may seem daunting right now, and you're like, oh my gosh, this says I never wanted to be a SQL Server developer. Trust me, this is not hard at all. The hard thing you already did, which is learn Access, right? If you're here today in this class because you know how to use, database relational design theory, you know what the first normalization order is, second normalization order, third normalization order. You did the hard stuff already. This is easier, right? This is easier. So you already did the bicycle, and now you're just learning the car, right? It's just not, you'll do fine, right? So don't want you guys to get disappointed at that. All right, now, if you take anything away tonight from this presentation, it's this: you gotta leverage ADODB in your code in order to maximize that relationship between Access and SQL Server. Now let's talk about how typically that would be. Now ADODB, by the way, and somebody would say, "Oh no, that was deprecated." It's not deprecated anymore. In fact, it came back last year. It came back. Microsoft decided to go because there was such an uproar worldwide when they decided to deprecate. So it's not going anywhere. The other day I was hearing somebody saying, Oh, ADLDB is deprecated. No, it's not. I actually wrote a post about that on my blog. All right. So this is some relatively simple stuff, right? I got a record set here. And notice that I fully qualify it in my code, access code ADLDB.record set. Now, if I'm using DAO, I don't have to use ADLDB. I don't have to do DAO.record set. But if you look at our code at ITMPact, we specifically declare these record set objects, either ADLDB or DAO. So if I'm using a DAO record set object, I say DIMRS as DAO.record set. Now, in order to use ADLDB in your record set, the first thing you have to do is add the links to ADLDB as a reference to your SQL Server, to your Access Server. So if we go to Tools, References here, you're going to see them here in this project. Right? And I'm using, this is for Microsoft ADL. For DDL security, you need that. If you're going to be using table manipulation in code, we always add that to our code. And also ActiveX Data Objects, ADL 2.8. That's the most recent version, I believe. You need that link. So you need to do that manually. It doesn't happen, right? So you got to check that off. And the way I do this, by the way, notice how after all these checks, it starts with the letter A. See that? Little trick here. If you click that first one and then press M on your keyboard from Microsoft, it takes you all the way to the M. So you don't have to scroll through. Just click on that and then type M, and now you can go to the Microsoft there and just start adding. These are the prior versions. See that? There's a newer version. There's 6.1. I have to look into that. See if that's something we should probably upgrade into. This is an older Microsoft database that we use for demo purposes. So it could be that we're already down to 6.1. A lot of that is handled automatically by a builder tool that we created at ITMPact that Mark has a lot of experience with recently when he first started working with it this year. And it does that for you. It does all the references. You don't have to worry about ADLDB. It's already easy. ADLDB, the technique I'm talking about today, is already included. It does all that plumbing. Because one of the things, the reason we built that tool, so it's like a tool to build a database, right? One of the things that I work with Ben Cloutier on, who's a chief architect at ITMPact, has been, I don't want to start from scratch every time I do a project, right? Nor do I want to go grab a project I just finished to use it for a new project and then strip out stuff. That's just inefficient. I want to be able to go to a tool and tell it, create an Access database with our standard code and do other references and add our standard modules for easy LDB and DSL-less linking and everything else and if for a question of minutes, I'm up and running, and then I can focus on the important stuff, right? Because when they hire us, they hire us for our expertise. When we build a new database, and we already know the requirements, right? Maybe they need a custom invoicing app and need invoice tables, or maybe they need a company table. And so something we noticed over the years is almost always you need a company table. Almost always you need a context table, and the context table is a child to the company table, which is the master. So we have code that you just check that off. Okay, I want this, this, and that. And it adds those tables to SQL Server and adds a code, and then we can start charging the customer. We don't charge the customer for all that stuff, right? I mean, this stuff, you can ask Mark. It saves you days of work. This whole process that we squished down to just less than an hour, when it's used properly, when you learn it good, like Mark says, when Mark first started, God bless him, he tried, and it took him a little bit, but he finally mastered it. It just takes you an hour. We don't charge that the days of work that we save the customer. He says, okay, it took me an hour. That's what I'm going to charge the customer, right? And, Mark just saying, I love the build. We call it the build internally. Thank you, Mark, for that. And so, that's the value proposition that we offer our clients when they come to us. And the fact that not only we're known worldwide as experts in the space of Access SQL Server, but we're not going to charge you for all that. We tell them up front, we have the framework and this is how we use it and so forth. Okay. Now, this is all the things you would normally have to do to use your record system. Now, this is all you have to do. Look at this block of code. What is this really doing? Well, it's setting up a connection using the provided SQL DB, which is obsolete, by the way. Now it's another version of it, and it's also SQL Server Express, and you have the username and the password, and then you have to open that connection, and then you have to check to see if the connection is open. If it's closed, identify the user. Now you're ready. Once you create the connection, now you're ready to create the record set. Oh, okay. Set RS new ADB record set, instantiate the object, identify the active connection. I mean, this goes on and on and on, right? Also, I can just open this record set, and now I'm ready to receive the results of that record set in my code to do to Lord knows how what. And so when you go and you see the stuff on the web, right? Because you're gonna see ADODB versions in the web, you're gonna see all of this over and over again. Microsoft's code samples and websites throughout the web, and they have to because that's the right way of doing it. I'm not saying this is wrong. This is the right way of doing it. But if you have to do all these lines of code, and granted, you could probably automate this to a certain extent, that's a lot of time. And so what I did was I said, you know what, I'm going to create a methodology called Easy ADODB. And I talk about that. And all of that is this right here, open my record set. So this open my record set is a procedure that does all those lines of code. I just type open my record set, I pass along the record set object, I pass along my SQL statement, it goes, executes all those lines in one place in my library, right? I mean, it's just a very simple thing. It's just it's a framework I created. Comes back with the results. Bingo, I'm done. So you could do it this way, and that's fine, and you're all going to do that, or you can grab this ACADODB module, which you can download from this website. So I'm going to pass you the link here. Somebody just asked me a question here in the comments, and James, I'll be right there in a second. And I'm going to show you where you can grab the code because I don't think it's pretty obvious what that is. Give me a second. There's a link in here. Free code. To use the code, first open it here. Here you go. So what you do is you copy this into a new module in Access. Just copy the whole thing, Control A, Control C, upgrade your module, paste it there, you're off to the races. And you can follow along in my code sample there. So it's just a easy way. So a lot of times, it's funny because I'm at conferences. You know, I used to travel a lot before COVID. I was supposed to be in Spain last summer at a conference in Spain, and I'll be in Germany before that. I was in Denver before that. I was traveling as a way to earn my MVP. I would tell myself, but you know, to the government, I would say, you know, I need to travel to earn. This is all business travel, but I love the fact of the matter is I love traveling. And I would hear other presenters talk about Easy ODB. And of course, you know, when I heard that, I just like, oh my gosh, my chest just swelled with pride every time I hear. And Juan's Easy ODB is what I use and this and that. And a lot of people come to use it. So I'm really glad that it's really permeated the Access community to the point where two developers can talk about Easy ODB and they understand each other. All right, so it looks like, Mark, you already answered the question for James. James had a question in the comments there. And that comment was, how have your user interface evolved as you migrate to SQL Server? Mark is a big fan of ours. Before he joined the firm, he was a big fan, and now he's seen the internal tools. He's even more of a fan now. But yeah, our interfaces is, how can I say this? You could have the best, fastest, most wonderful Access application. But if it looks like it was built by a guy down the street, a kid in high school who's just learned SQL Access, people are not going to be impressed, right? And so it's always important that you win them with the eye candy, because that's half the battle, right? And so I'll show you an example of our interface. I'll close this, open it up again, not save it. Let's see here. No. I'm going to show you how this demo looks. All right. You see this? This is a professionally done Access database, right? Now, you know what people tell me? The first thing that when they see this, you know what they tell me? Is that an Access database? Because it looks like a web app. And so this is a testament to my people. Trust me, I did not design any of this stuff because I'm more of a back-end coder or architect kind of a guy. But we have people at our firm, Leiling, who is just amazing with interfaces. And this is nothing. I mean, the Lean's work is taking this far and gone, but if I come in here and, for example, and I open the order queue, I got these beautiful icons up here, right? These are not standard icons that you would get. So she has these icons, and we use the icon library, iconography library. So we store the icon once, usually everywhere in the project. And then if I come in and open the order, by clicking here to open the order, I have these beautiful icons here at the top. So it's a whole theme that we developed over the years with Lean's help at that firm, so that when somebody calls us up, right, because we get most of our clients to Google AdWords. Well, when you're on Google AdWords, you see everybody's ads. You see my ads. You see my competitors' ads. They don't know you from squat, so you got to win them over. When they call you, you have 1 hour to win them over, and this is how we win them over. We show them the desktop, and they're like, oh, wait a second. That's beautiful. And then we show them how easy it was to navigate. I click on the open order queue, and then click on the open order number. Now I'm into the order itself, and look, hey, I got a document center here. I can upload documents to SQL Server, and rather than being in a network folder, this is easier, right, customer? Oh, yeah. After half an hour of this, I got a meeting on my hand. Because they're like, they never seen anything like this. Most people have never seen a professionally done Access database. They just haven't. All they've seen what Joe in the warehouse did, who learned Access while he was working there, and everybody was impressed with his work because, of course, nobody else knows how to use Access. They don't know what a database table, they have no clue what a record is. And they thought what Joe did was amazing. And then they look at this and like, well, I guess Joe isn't the end-all and be-all after all. Can ADLDB record set be used as an update or record source for an Access form? We do not do that. We know of a lot of people love doing that. A lot of people use ADLDB record set. They connect to SQL Server, right? They bind the ADLDB record set to a form. Then they disconnect the SQL Server connection object from the ADLDB record set, and you continue using that. I don't like that methodology. So us, it's buggy. Ben and I both don't like it. We shy away from that. We rather stay connected to SQL Server using DAO on the forms. Now this is Alfonso. He was asking in the Alphonse, who was asking in the comments. I'd rather just stay connected to SQL Server and avoid the whole hassle. Here's the thing. I'm glad you brought this up. Great question, by the way. You see a lot of people on the web who advocate, for example, a disconnected approach, an unbound approach, right? So, for example, look at this form here. When I put this in design view, which I'm going to do now, all these fields are bound, right? See how they're bound? All these fields are bound to the underlying record source using DAO. But there are people on the web who argue about unbound. So they will not have it bound. It'll be like that. It'll be unbound. And when it's unbound, it's a lot faster. They argue in terms of fast and faster. It's a lot faster because it's unbound. I don't like that because now you have to add code and manage binding that control at runtime, and that's just more moving out of the natural behavior. And that's my point. You want to stick to the natural behavior of Microsoft Access. You don't want to stray too far outside of it. What is the natural behavior of Access? To use tables, use queries, use forms, use bound forms, use DAO for forms. So we tend to push the Access envelope at IT Impact. We tend to be pushing the Access envelope as much as anybody, but we stick to what the product is naturally designed for, and we try to optimize within that context. Can ADLDB be used? That's a great question, Alphonse. Thank you very much. Yeah, Mark, please don't shout with uppercase. That's not good. Great questions. You guys, I love this. I'll this back and forth. So, okay, so we're almost done here. We talked about ADLDB record sets. We talked about the SN list. Okay, stay away from hybrid queries. Remember when we talked about this last class? You don't want to link a SQL Server table with a local table in a query because the SQL Server doesn't see the local table. It'll just push all that data down to Access, and it's just too slow. But ADLDB record sets, ADLDB commands. So that's another thing. So let me just go back to the website. Okay. So open my record set. Now execute my command. Here's what Here's what I used when I was going back to that update, right, to set the prices. Remember I talked about my example? Is that you want to use execute my command and then space and then pass along. And in this example is update TBO client set the state of Illinois where client ID equal 100, right? So I set all those clients to the state of Illinois for whatever reason. Why do you want to do it this way? Because you're bypassing DAO in your code, right? So usually these kind of things happen in the code anyway, at the code level, right? Using business rules and business objects. So you may have a button in the admin section of your application that only administrators can have it to, because, you know, let's face it, not everybody should be updating prices by 10% across the board. That's something that's usually going to happen far in between. So only an admin probably doing that. And when you may have design a form that says, okay, what percent you want to increase it, right? So you'll have a form with a field on there, and you format the field the percentage, and you put, okay, 5%, and click go. Well, when you click the go button or the execute button or run button, in the background, it's just going to have the single line, execute my command space, and then update pricing, set price equal to price times 1.1 or 1 times 1 plus whatever the value is in that form, right? 5%, 10%. A couple things with this, execute my command. Number one, if it fails back, and it should be wrapped in a transaction, right? So here's my update statement. And if even one record, right, I have 100,000 record product, for example, in my product database table, if one record fails for whatever reason, maybe somebody was in that record at that exact moment where I was doing an update statement, you probably heard this before, it locks that table. It should fail, roll back, and inform the user, right? So always do it that way. So it's just one other aspect of so usually it's open records to execute my command. I believe there are other things in there that you're going to find in that code. Let me go open the code again. Let's see, free code. Let's see, I have execute, open my records is here, right there, and then execute my command is there. And then con connection. So con connection is what it does that. And I take this back. This is not wrapped in a update. It should be wrapped in a transaction. It's not. So probably the latest code does that. James, great question. So are you tracking changes at the field level in SQL or at the role level in Access? When they have SQL Server Enterprise, that's a feature in SQL Server Enterprise. So if your customer can afford 25 Gs, and you'd be surprised, a lot of people can, right? Especially if you have 100 users and it's a $50 million company, 25 Gs is not a stretch in imagination. Enterprise, SQL Server Enterprise does have field tracking and row tracking and availability. So you can set those parameters to track. If you need that out on SQL Server Standard or Express, you have to come up with your own methodology. And I have a blog post on that. And let's see if I can bring that up. Let's see here. Track, site, access experts. I have the blog post, I believe, that talks about that. Maybe elected officials, country clerk, offshore customer code. We use this for SEO. I need to specify the blog /blog. Oh, there you go. No, I still got that. Let's see here. I have, let's see, track changes. Let's see. It might be even, and here it goes. Create, delete, update, clear. We call it audit tables. So this is a methodology you can use to track changes. If you ever need to. So I talk about creating an audit table and then posting the changes. So I track the whole record, right? So before they make changes to the record, I post it to the audit table. And now I can review the audit table. This stuff is not easy to implement, right? And I tend to shy away. If I really need it and the customer needs it, fine, we'll do it. But for the most part, we rather use backup and restore part. And the way we back up SQL Server Express, which is one of the good nuggets here that you want to do is you want to use SQL FTP and Backup Express, which is a product you can purchase for $35 to back up SQL Server Express, because SQL Server Express doesn't come with any backup utilities by default. Yes, you can back up SQL Server Express manually, go in there and manually back it up, but it doesn't allow you to create jobs. It doesn't have an agent for backup like SQL Server Standard does. So you can use that product, SQL Server FTP and Express. I'll send you a link because I get a small commission every time you purchase it, so I appreciate if you use the link I send you. And you can schedule all your backups, right? So usually the way we set up those backups is we do a nightly backup and then hourly throughout the day. That way, if we have an issue with the total crash of the server, we do the backup from last night, and then we restore those hourlies until the point of backup. So most you lose 1 hour worth of data. In the high volume transaction environment, they really should have standard or enterprise version, right? So if somebody calls me up and says, yeah, I want you to build me the solution, and and by the way, we're going to be doing 5,000 transactions per hour. We're not going to do that SQL Server Express. I'm going to tell you, no, you got to go either standard or most likely enterprise on that. But for the most part, the stuff we design for our clients is small business, and SQL Server Express is more than fine. But 9 times out of 10, SQL Server Express is fine. All right, these have all been great questions. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate that. Sometimes I'm talking this and nobody's asking questions, and at the end of the night, I say, any questions? And it's like crickets. You hear crickets, so I appreciate that. For SQL Server Express, create SPs for backups, procedure for backups, and call it from a scheduled task. Office. Like, very good, yeah. Alphonse is correct. You could use the Windows scheduler, and using T-SQL commands, you can then tell Express to back itself up to a certain file. Use that. And the nice thing about SQL Server Express is you can do backups while people are using a database, which is the nice thing about SQL Server, as opposed to using the backend. So look, this journey to being an expert with Access and SQL Server is well worth it. If you haven't started down this road yet, I encourage you to do so. It's very fulfilling. As Access developers, you're natural candidates to learn this stuff. You're going to have no problem learning it. It's not easy, but it's not impossible either. And you're going to love the lag, the tunnel. And I'll tell you one more other thing you probably did not realize. All it takes is one project, man. You do one project of optimizing, migrating Access to SQL Server, and the rest of them are just going to fall in place like dominoes. They're going to be super easy to do. Have implemented user-defined pagination for subforms, tier queries. Is this something that is easy to do in SQL Server? I have, James, I have never done that myself. I tend to leave the default behavior in Access, and I know that the default behavior is not to use user-defined pagination, but have you found that to be good in your case? I'd love to hear more about that. How has that helped you?
I'm still testing, just because there's, in some cases, a large number of records coming back in a continuous subform, and I don't want the user to have to scroll up or down or bring back 1,000 transactions or whatever. So I created the queries to have more or less up and down arrows, and then build the a variable or a temp var into the subform to say, okay, well, we want 50 records to show up all the time, or page name by 50 records. And you click on the arrows, and that way you can keep the asterisk at the bottom, of your screen, and not have to scroll all the way down to the end, to add a new record. So it's that's worked out, and it's faster in SQL Server. So I just wanted, instead of rolling my own, if if we had to worry about returning large,
Let's talk about that. So I'm glad you asked me the question. So notice this one here. If you come down here, if you follow my cursor down here, it's 3,000 rows plus in this TBO companies right now. What James is talking about is if you go and you create a search for companies, and they enter a really wide search parameter, they might get several thousand results back. But honestly, people are not going to page through 3,000 results. Just like Google says, oh, you got 2 million results. I challenge anybody to go to the last result page, right? You just don't do that. You just look at the first page in Google results or second page of that. So what James is doing is, for those of us who want to follow along, is I can say top 25, and it'll return only the first top 25 records of this. And then internally, he's keeping track of what was the first 25 and the last 25. So notice here, I get 25 records back with the top 25. So he's keeping track in his code to say, okay, what was the last 25? Okay, let me do 25 plus that, and then get those additional ones. What we tend to do is, I remember a case where I did a project for a customer who has franchisees throughout the U.S., and they were using Access, and I migrated data back into the cloud. And now they're using a complete web app. They hired us to do it completely in the web. But back then, I migrated to cloud. And when I was doing the project, I noticed that when they would search for customers, it would load all the customers in the form. And then it would ask, okay, what's the customer name? What's the customer C you want to search for? So I said, well, that's dumb. I'm not going to load any results. I'm not going to load any results unless you specify criteria. So I designed the search form to do that. When I go demo the beta version, the president of the company says, wow, that search form came up really quick. I said, what do you mean? He says, oh, man, it just take a few seconds to load. Of course it took a few seconds. We're loading all the customers in the subform before you even put in a search criteria. So I earned some brownie points there because the fact that right off the bat it was faster. And then I always search when they have a search criteria. But in that case, James, what I do is I have them use the search form to search the customers, and then they can just click on one customer and it opens the customer form and only loads that customer, right? So if it's that customer has 25 orders or 25 contacts, right? That's a lower load on the server doing it that way. So what I'll do is actually I'll set the record source of the customer form to say select, these fields from the company table where company ID equal 100. And now it's just loads that company and therefore, so it loads one record. Now there's a drawback to that, right? A lot of people are used to seeing the records and going backwards and forwards and searching and doing this and that. And I try to dissuade them from that behavior. It says, if you're going to need to find a customer, go use search this customer form, use that, and then come back here. Now, what I have done is they will lay, for example, 25 records in the customer search form. And then when they click on one, it loads that one. And when they go back and forth in that customer form, it's actually reading the results in the search form and it's resetting the search, the record source of the form to read just that customer, right? Or I'll load just those 25 IDs. I'll say select star from TPK companies where company ID in, and then I'll pass the in clause, right? So I'll do something like this, where company ID in, and then select company ID maybe from a TBL temp search results. And I'll use that in clause and where user ID, now this is again a little bit more complex, where user ID equal 100, right? Because you may have a table in the cloud called TBL temp search results, but then there might be multiple people in the company searching at that moment. So that could be it. Yeah, Marcus got a good point. We get this constantly. People call us up and say, oh, this form is loading super slow, and I'm getting memory errors, especially if they're using a 32-bit access. And they're getting memory errors. Of course they're getting memory errors because they have 20 tabs, and they're loading all the tabs. And so what we developed at ITM Pack is a methodology where it loads the first tab, right, of those 20. It loads the first tab. And then when you click on another tab, it unloads that prior tab and then loads that tab subform. And now you're in that tab. And then as you go back and forth through the tabs, you only really have one subform in memory at a time. So it just actually unloads that and frees up the memory. Great question, Mark. Great observation there, Mark. All right. Any other questions before we go? Did you guys like today's presentation? All right. Provided many tips. I'm glad that it helped. Lisa. Thanks, James. Thank you very much. How many participants do we have here? Does it say? Yeah, 6. Okay. Well, look, these are the 6 hardcore people who showed up today. Thank you so much for showing up. So look, and to complete, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the videos that you like there. You can follow me on social media. I'm at jsoto22 on Twitter. Link with me on LinkedIn. I'm at linkedin.com/in/Juan Soto. And we'll have you back here in December. And so long, everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Okay, take care. We'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.